G'day, I'm Jan Wasitsky and I'm here today with Geoff Hocking. Geoff is an artist, he's a graphic artist, a sculptor, he's a publisher and the author of many books including Beneath the Southern Cross, Gold Fever and a history of this town where we're sitting today, Castlemaine, from camp to city. The reason I mention those books amongst the many that Geoff's written is that the subject that we're going to talk about today is the gold rush and in particular the monster meeting which happened here at Castlemaine in 1851. So Geoff, thanks for having us here in your studio.
It's a pleasure, welcome.
Can we begin? What's your connection to this place, this country and its history?
To this place, well, we didn't know this when we moved here, but in fact both my wife's grandparents and my grandparents came through Castlemaine during the gold rush and my grandparents towards the end of the gold rush. My mother's grandfather actually owned the Old England Hotel at one stage at Barker's Creek.
Oh, yeah.
For a very short time. He was a gambler and lost that one, I think, and then moved to Bendigo and then lost another one and then he got kicked out. So, but my wife's great-grandparents lived in Chewton, just near the site of the monster meeting, and their house is still there. In fact, you can see the monster meeting site from their front door. They had a tannery there making parchment for Parliament, employing quite a lot of people, about 30, 40 people. So they were there right at the very beginning. So we feel very connected to this region. When I was born in Bendigo, in a street called Chum Street, the New Chum Gully was just opposite where we lived. I went to Specimen Hill Primary School and then to Golden Square. So that's New Chum, which is very Goldfields' name, Specie Hill,
Yeah.
and Golden Square. And then I went to the School of Mines, to the art school. So I somehow feel that my entire education was peppered with Goldfields references.
But how about we start with the flag, the monster meeting flag, which was flown at the monster meeting on December the 15th, 1851, and it reappeared at the Red Ribbon Agitation in Bendigo. This flag, you're a graphic man. Can you tell us about it, what it looks like? Maybe show us one in your books there?
Yes, certainly. I think we've got to assume that the same flag was flown at both meetings. There is an engraving by Tulloch of the monster meeting in Chewton, and it shows a very small part of that. It's got a tiny little flag in it. I've actually got hold of a really good copy of that and I've blown it up as much as I can, and it's very hard to tell what was actually drawn on it. In Bendigo, 2 years later, at the Diggers March up View Street, Howick describes the flag very well. And if you could pass that one over to me, thanks, Jan. This is a representation of the flag done in Castlemaine a number of years ago, and I know we've panned back to see all of that. But Howick describes the flag as having a pick and shovel. He actually also says it has a cradle. He describes it as having the bundle of sticks, which is shown here by a bundle of twigs, as if they were picked up off the forest floor. It describes the kangaroo and emu as meaning Australia, and the scales as meaning the scales of justice. Now, this has been represented in a graphic form in this flag by a graphic artist in Castlemaine and been adopted by the Monster Meeting or the Chewton Domain Society. I have been at pains to point out that I think there are some serious difficulties in the way this flag's represented.
So we've got some contested history here.
Well, I don't disagree with the items that are displayed. What I do disagree with is the symbolic nature of them. Graphic symbols didn't come into being until the beginning of the 20th century. These are represented as purely graphic symbols. In fact, the flag was painted by...
So before the beginning of the 20th century, there was only literate
They
symbols?
would have been painted as representing real objects.
Yeah.
Mr. Dexter was a China painter, so he painted this flag, and he would have painted it in the style of 19th century trade union banners, which were quite common at the time. And if you know what they look like, they're highly painted, very descriptive. And I can only assume, I'm making an assumption here, but I can only assume that he would have used that style. I mean, I do have some difficulties in accepting the fact that we've got the kangaroo and emu face to face. Almost
Why
all,
is that?
Well, almost all representations of the Advance Australia emblem, which had a kangaroo and emu before Federation, had them back to back. In the same way that the lion and the unicorn are on the British coat of arms are facing outwards from the coat of arms, I can't see any reason why someone would turn these two objects or two animals inwards, except after Federation they were turned inwards to hold up the Australian crest. The kangaroo's got its paws up and the emu has one leg up. This is a representation that is post-Federation. If you take the trouble to look back at, there's a company called Lauke, it's a flour miller from South Australia. It has a symbol which was registered in 1853, I think, and it shows the kangaroo and emu which are back to back. And I've looked at anti-transportation lead flags, looked at just drawings done of Advance Australia, images done by S.T. Gill, and they all show them back to back. So I think the research here is lacking. However, to move on in the total destruction...
I'm getting more than I bargained for.
To move on total destruction of this flag, these are represented as gold scales, and Dexter and Howard actually described Dexter's flag as representing the scales of justice. The scales of justice don't have a stand. They're held by Justice on a sculpture on the top of the Old Bailey in London, and they're held by her holding the beam by her fingers. There is no central stand on them. These are gold scales. So I think the interpretation's not what it should be.
Okay.
By the same...
Albeit well-meant.
Well-meaning. I've had discussions with the people who accept this flag and said, look, I don't think this is right, and they have no interest in discussing it with me. So I'm discussing it now. No, this is a bundle of sticks. It is quite clear that these should be what are known as lafago. That means kindling, but if you want to see what the bundle of sticks should look like, Abraham Lincoln on the Lincoln Memorial in Washington is sitting there, and both hands are on bundles of sticks. They're the Roman centurion's bundle. They're sticks which are bound together with leather cloth, and they represent unity. And this is what this is meant to represent. This is a collection of kindling, and I don't believe that this is what Dexter would have drawn.
Where did this bundle of sticks image come from?
Well, it's quite well known as a symbol of the Roman centurion unity. So what happened is every time someone within the centurion's group of 100 men, if anyone was killed, one stick would be removed. They represented the community and the power of the state. The bundle of sticks, however, normally have the blade of an axe sticking out of them, which also represents the power of the state to take revenge upon you if you misbehave. So both community and absolute power are represented in the one symbol.
I remember a friend of mine who's an historian, I was telling him, Ted Egan, about the monster meeting and about the bundle of sticks. He said, that's the fascists.
Yes. Well, la fago is French, la fascista is Latin, and fascism comes from the same thing. It's unity and strength. I mean, the fascists actually get a very bad press. There is nothing wrong with unity and strength. There's nothing wrong with fascism. I mean, our entire political system is built upon all of us being hopefully the same and working together. That is, in essence, fascism. It got a very bad reputation. I'm not saying we should.
Somebody spoiled it.
Well, certainly did. I mean, and that's not true fascism. It's like the churches don't always represent true Christianity, nor does the communist state represent true communism. Most of these things are well-intentioned. It's just mankind has a habit of corrupting nearly everything.
Have you got an alternative image
of
how you reckon the
funny
flag
you should mention that.
reaches for the book, The Rebel Chorus, recently renamed under the Southern Cross?
Yeah. And this is a representation of that flag as I've interpreted it. I had someone else draw this for me rather than draw it myself. And it shows a painted version of those things as I've described it. So
And it's got the gold digger's cradle for rocking the gold.
which Howard describes. And he also describes it as being painted on the side of a tent, so it is unlikely that it would have been pure white. And we know that Howard ground his own paints from local stones
Oh.
and used gum and mixed everything up, so it's more likely that it was very earthy in colour rather than the bright colours of the alternative flag.
Who was Howard?
Howard was a journalist who travelled all around Australia during the goldfields, particularly of interest in his Bendigo, Castlemaine, Ballarat excursions. So he described all of these events very accurately, and it really is one of the best sources we can go to for these events today.
Yes.
14,000 men turned up, and I say men because there's no evidence that there are too many women around at the time.
Yeah.
So 14,000 turned up at that spot in Chewton. Why wouldn't you go? You're on the goldfields, there's not much else happening. Digging, sitting around a campfire, having a dinner, going to bed, digging, sitting around a campfire, having dinner, going to bed. It's a meeting is on. Why wouldn't you turn up to see what was happening? And these sorts of events were quite common back in in Britain. Monster meetings were popping up all over the place, and political protest or political meetings, people were quite used to going and listening to an orator talk.
And do you know the origin of the term monster meeting?
Well, I have some thoughts about this. There were monster meetings at Peterloo, which is in Manchester, when 50,000 people turned up on St Peter's Fields. It was called a monster meeting. They were asking for really workers' rights. 15,000 troops moved in on them with swords and bayonets, killing a large number. It was a terrible massacre of workers by those in charge.
And when was this?
Well, I just have to. I can't keep I can't keep everything in my head, but this was in 1819. So the Chartist petitions were 20 or 30 years later than this, and they were defeated time and time again. The people on these diggings are well aware of what's going on. They've just left England, most of them. They know what's going on, and what's being replicated here in the diggings is exactly what was happening back home. You've got those in power, that is those with money, pushing everyone else around.
Except you've got the diggers here, the ordinary people on the goldfields. At least some of them, and many of them also, have got cash in their pocket.
Oh, that's right.
So they're empowered, like at home they're not.
And the government, Latrobe actually said, these people shouldn't be allowed to have so much money. They just simply don't know what to do with it. The fact that you've got ordinary working men with large sums, people were known to pick up £1,000, some people, £1,000 worth of gold in a day. And Latrobe was probably right. They probably didn't know what to do with it. Like the sensible things, invest it, buy a home, get a nice farm. But I can't help but think you've got 20,000, by this time of the monster meeting, you've got sort of around 20,000 blokes hanging around in the creeks, living in tents. It'd be like going to Bathurst 10 times over.
You mean the Bathurst 500 car race?
Yeah, the car race, imagine getting all those young blokes, mostly, together in one spot. What hell that would be. And they fire one another up.
Are they educated?
Oh, a lot of them were. Education. A lot of them were very well educated. A lot of the orators and speakers and leaders were well educated. Certainly the Irish rebels were very well educated. So that comes out at Eureka. It comes from that very strong group of Trinity College trained lawyers and so on. All of the lay laws were well educated. And they're very strongly linked to their own stories too. I think at the monster meeting you've just got a confluence of blokes together, and so they go, well, let's do something about this. Let's all have a bit of a stamp our feet and shout and carry on.
David Bernier said something that I'd never heard anybody say before, and that was that the monster meeting, they weren't diggers before the monster meeting. After the monster meeting, they were the diggers.
Oh, well, I think that's probably true. They were blokes digging beforehand, just up here, and that probably welded them into that group. Because what was it? Diggers be aware, diggers take note. They were called diggers in the posters and things that went up.
Yeah.
I also think that the monster meeting may mean we've come together to monster the government, that is, annoy the government, and it's a term that was used certainly in Ireland and in Britain, so it's applied to the meetings here as well.
So it may be a verb as well as
a noun.
A noun.
Yeah, I think probably. It's just something that I've thinking about it. It makes sense to me that you go and monster something.
So in terms of democracy happening in Victoria, with beginning with a vote for men, not women, that came in after the Eureka Stockade, what do we owe to the diggers and the people that were standing up to the government for the whole 3 years before Eureka?
We owe them the system we have today in many ways. The fact that we do have essential freedom. We do have the ability to buy and purchase land. We do have a vote whether we own land or not. In fact, almost all of the Chartist demands that were rejected time and time again right up to 1847 were granted after the Commission of Inquiry into the Eureka affair. Almost everything that they'd been asking for was granted in Australia, not in Britain, but in Australia.
Geoff Hocking, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, John.